So the other day we did a video on Mateus Fernandes to Manchester United and whether or not he was actually a good alternative to Elliot Anderson this summer. And we used some different data in that video to what we normally would, and the feedback that I got in the comments was that you guys want to see more data. So today, a little bit like yesterday, we're doing something different. We're doing a data look. Now, as I have said before, data isn't really something that we use massively on this channel all of the time when scouting players, but I do think it is interesting. As we've said before, the Manchester United board, the team, the recruitment team especially, seem to be looking at data. We keep hearing about this data team that likes certain players that Manchester United are being linked with. Today we are going to use Scout Lab for everything. Again, this video is not sponsored, but they just produce great stats. So there is a link in the description down below. And the first thing that we want to look at is Mateus Fernandes and his radar, both from this season and last season. And you guys can see for yourself that there are a couple of things that immediately stand out. That is the carries, the ground duels, and the pass creation from Fernandes at some point over the past 2 seasons. I think the other thing that stands out immediately in that data is just how different the 2 seasons are. We've spoken about this quite a lot, about how Fernandes for Southampton, the season before last, was almost this further forward player. He was a creative attacking player, before at West Ham being used a lot deeper. And the data reflects those 2 very different skill sets. Now, data is fantastic for recruitment, but I wouldn't normally say that it can reflect things like the player's personality, for example. I don't think we normally see that in numbers. But with Scout Lab, we do get to see the percentage of a share of teams' progression. And for Mateus Fernandes, he is ranking in the 86th percentile for the share of his team's progression. So what that tells us is that he's a good progressive player. He's a player that can pick the ball up and progress it either via the carry or the pass. But I also think it tells you a lot about his personality. For someone to be so responsible for so much of the progressive play as a young player at a new club last season, I think that tells you a lot about the character and also how much trust he immediately got from his managers. His managers immediately, put him into the team and trusted him to lead that West Ham side in progressing the ball. And I think that is crucial. You want players that will show the confidence to take responsibility. You don't want players, especially in midfield, that are going to shy away from the ball, that are going to hide in the big moments. You want those guys with the character, the confidence, the swagger to the way that they play, to go and take the ball and then, of course, progress from that position. And I think in terms of the numbers, Mateus Fernandes did prove last season that he is certainly more than capable of doing that. From a tactical point of view, we know that that is something that we need. Michael Carrick, compared to Ruben Amorim, was someone that put much more focus on progressing through the middle of the pitch. Of course, to do that, you need players that can progress the ball. And it also means that our forwards don't have to come so deep. So particularly when we're chasing a game, we're trying to break a team down, we're trying to score a goal, Bruno doesn't have to drop quite as deep as what he did at times last season. He can stay higher, trusting these more progressive players in deeper zones to get the ball forward. With that in mind, there is an argument that this is the most important data set that we will look at today. I just don't think we can put enough emphasis on how important that is. The player who's going to grab the game in the middle of the park. And, ultimately, ball progression, it is one of the most important stats in football, right? Because ultimately, you can't score a goal if you can't get the ball forward. So you do need these players, whether it's via passing or carrying, and we'll come back to that in just a second. But you do need those players that are going to take responsibility. And this reflects what we've seen, right? How many times have we done a video on Mateus Fernandes and said that he's an all-action midfielder, he's someone that gets involved. But I think he's really making himself available. And that's what you want when Lomans, when Martinez, Maguire, whoever it might be, are trying to play out from the back. You need those players to show for the ball. And the fact that Fernandes is so responsible for progression at West Ham tells us that he would do that. Now, another piece of data that really impressed me on Scout Lab was this, and this will take a little bit of explaining. But Mateus Fernandes ranks in the 90th percentile for his expected pass over performance percentage, which sounds really complicated, really long-winded. What it basically means is that Fernandes completes passes that a lot of other midfielders in the league aren't able to complete. So he's such a good passer that he has more passes available to him. Sometimes you'll sit there watching a football match, and I think at home it's so easy to see it on the telly, right? You see a midfielder pick the ball up, you see this player in space, and you're screaming, you're going mad just telling him to play that ball through the lines. But some players just don't have the ability. They might be able to see the pass, but perhaps they don't trust their ability to pass. There are better passers than others in football. But what we found out with that data there is that Mateus Fernandes is one of the good ones, right? One of the ones who can complete those passes in the middle of the pitch and out wide as well. But it almost unlocks him a bit more tactically, because there's passes that are available to him that aren't available to others. And for Carrick, that's a great skill set to have. We always feel that to be a unique tactical team, truly unique, you've got to make the most of your players, because your players' skill sets are different to every other football club in the world. So to have a player that can find passes that others can't absolutely gives Manchester United an advantage. His numbers are also extremely impressive in terms of his forward passes. So he isn't just finding new passes that are safe and sideways for the sake of completing them, he is being progressive as well. And with Casemiro leaving the club, that is something that we need. But also, with again that idea of keeping Bruno Fernandes higher. There was a game last season, I can't quite think which one it was, but it was a game where we needed a goal late on, and Bruno Fernandes basically became a centre-back, just so that we could get the ball forward, because no one else could pass it quick enough. Whereas if you have Mateus Fernandes, who has proven that he's got more passes available to him, including progressive passes, well then once again, it means that Bruno can play that much higher. And just to sort of back this up, Mateus Fernandes, his pass sonar from last season, you can see a very good pass completion rate, lots of green bars, but also he is trying to move the ball forward. In every phase of play, he's trying to progress, diagonally left, diagonally right, and also straight through the middle. So this is really ticking boxes. I've said a few times over recent months that I think Manchester United, Old Trafford central midfielders, are actually more about their passing than the dribbling, and I think Mateus Fernandes really slots quite nicely into that box. Now the final thing that we need to talk about is Mateus Fernandes and his defensive ability, because at the moment, I'm getting the feeling that he might be our premium midfielder that we signed. We all think it's going to be 2 or 3 midfielders this summer. Ederson is hopefully the third choice one, and we're going to go out and get 2 big names. But it does feel as though Mateus Fernandes may be the most expensive, the premium midfielder, that therefore you may expect to start a lot of football matches. And you would expect him to play alongside Kobbie Mainoo, which means we do need someone with defensive ability. And importantly, Fernandes ranks in the 93rd percentile for his defensive ground duel percentage. And this is a little bit different to what we've seen with previous signings. Over the past few years, United have tried to sign ball-winning midfielders, whether that's someone like a Casemiro or a Manuel Ugarte. But a lot of those midfielders, the numbers that looked good was the number of duels that they were attempting, which is very different to the percentage of duels that you are successful in. So let me explain that. If you are a player that is involved in a lot of duels, that tells me, for example, that you're mobile, that you get stuck into a lot of challenges, but it doesn't tell me whether or not you're winning those tackles. Whereas if your ground duel percentage is high, it tells me that you're going into those tackles, perhaps not as frequently, we don't know, but you're going into those tackles, and when you do go into those situations, you are successful with your ability to win the ball. And ultimately, that is more important. I would rather have an efficient ball winner in the midfield rather than a high volume one. Someone that when he goes into the tackle is going to make sure that it sticks. He's going to be strong in the challenge. And again, for a young midfielder who has only played a couple of years in the Premier League, the fact he's been able to adapt so quick is great. And I do think, you just give him more time. He's still very young. Give him more time to develop and to grow. He might physically get bigger, or he might improve his tackling technique or his timing. He's just going to get even better. I would be surprised to see his dueling percentages ever decrease or ever go down. He's someone who has that skill set. We've seen it in videos, sort of video footage that we have covered before. We know that he's a good dueler. But to see the numbers backing it up, it does help, doesn't it? It does help sort of reassure you when we're thinking of this player. And I think Kobbie Mainoo, in a way, is quite similar. He doesn't necessarily fly into 100 duels in a game, but actually when he does, he's often quite successful because he's clever with the way that he uses his body, whether that's his arms, his hips, or his legs. He's an efficient, clever ball winner, just not necessarily someone who, goes into 90 challenges a game. And Mateus Fernandes is perhaps a little bit similar. I would say he's more mobile. I would say he goes into more duels than Kobbie. But the important thing is that he is successful. The last thing that you need in your midfield, particularly if you're playing next to Kobbie Mainoo, who might sometimes venture higher, the last thing you want is someone who goes into 20 tackles a game but misses every time, right? Because now we're just leaving so much space in behind us. So I would rather someone actually who is competing in slightly less duels, and we can see that he's still all over the pitch. He's going into tackles literally everywhere, every blade of grass, but he's more successful. Right, right? So when he is going into these challenges, he isn't getting beaten. He makes sure the ball sticks. So he isn't leaving that space vacant behind him. I think that's more important. So yeah, basically, actually at the time of this video going out, I am away for the weekend and I wanted to pre-record a video for you guys to watch, and I thought, why not explore a little bit of data? Like I said, in recent times in the comment sections, people have asked for more stats to be used, more data to be used, and it does make sense. The Manchester United data team is such a big talking point at the moment. Data signings and things like that are a huge talking point. Now, I personally don't believe data is the way to go exclusively, in the same way that I don't believe the eye test is the way to go exclusively. I think the way that you scout players and you learn about them is by combining the two of them. I think you have to watch footballers. You have to watch them because then you'll see more context of the match, the way that they approach things, emotionally how they react and things like that. But we have to admit the data is also very useful to see certain things that might steer us in a certain direction, things that we want to look out for. And I think with Mateus Fernandes, if you're Manchester United right now and you're looking at his data, you're seeing a player that takes a lot of responsibility on the ball, that is happy to be the progressive player, that is a fantastic passer and also an efficient jeweler, and as we saw right at the start with his radars, someone that has produced two very different seasons, sort of showing that he is a complete player that can play several different roles. So in a data sense, that is why Manchester United won Mateus Fernandes this summer. I think it's pretty clear that this football club wants him, and this is just yet another reason why. But apart from that, I think that's everything that we wanted to discuss for today. So we are now finished. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you have enjoyed it. If you have, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and get your notifications on. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.